Yeah, so you talked about stopping illegal wars, and there is a dot I wanted to connect there to something you said earlier, because I think a phrase that you used that I could imagine somebody watching or listening to this and saying, well, hold on, right? What do you mean there? Was the Trump Pelosi concentration camps?
Yes.
But of course, that's literally true, right? I mean, the Democrats control the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House, and that means that they control the purse strings that fund things like concentration camps, or for that matter, you want to talk about illegal wars that at the very time that of course conservative media thought that she was a progressive devil, right? But that during the Bush era, right, anytime, right, Pelosi and the Democrats could have cut off funding to the war, and they didn't, right? Anytime, right now, they could cut off funding to ICE and the concentration camps, and they don't do it.
Or the DHS goon squads, or the NSA surveillance apparatus, or the CIA torture, drone strike, assassination, national security crisis creation machine. There's any number of things that we do that are ham-fisted, belligerent, ignorant, frankly stupid wastes of resources that kill Americans at the end of the day. Let's go in on this. I think particularly, and I only reference this because I just mentioned the CIA, there's so many things that agency has gotten away with, and its budget has only continued to increase. No one even knows what it is because the bottom line budget number is somehow classified. I mean, that is just such a glaring revelation of corruption to me. This is the same agency that trained Al-Qaeda because it was convenient at the time to fight the Soviets. We called them the Mujahideen then. This is the same agency that ran crack cocaine into the United States and ended up killing US police officers, prompting both the paramilitarization of police and the metastasis of mass incarceration. This is the same agency that has assassinated US citizens and their children based on speech alone, while those people's families were in courts trying to vindicate their rights. That's the criminal intelligence agency. And this is the same agency that Nancy Pelosi has done everything she can to insulate. There is a continuing cover-up into CIA human rights abuses. There is a trove of evidence amounting to thousands of photos, video evidence of offenses as severe as outright murder in CIA custody of detainees, which never seen the light of day because the person who helped facilitate the cover-up got promoted to lead the agency with Nancy Pelosi's support. Everything that the Trump administration has done, he might have signed the orders, but it was Nancy Pelosi signing the checks.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And it is amazing, right? As you go through that list of horrors, from this agency, which, I mean, that's just a remarkable thing that in a democracy you'd have a government agency whose budget is secret. But that list of horrors, right? And so many of those things are at this point just acknowledged. I think about there's a movie called American Made from 3 years ago that was like a mainstream Hollywood movie. Tom Cruise was in it, right? That was about the way that the CIA was entangled with drug running in the 80s. And it wasn't even controversial when it came out. It was just like a nothing. It's like, oh yeah, no, that's a thing that happened, in the 80s. Sure, right? There was some, there was some cocaine, whatever, right?
Yeah, we tortured some folks. Let's look forward, not back.
Yeah, exactly right. And even in another of the examples that you just gave in that litany of horrors, the drone assassinations, at least two that I can think of American citizens. They're at the time, of course, they don't announce we're trying to kill this guy, we're trying to kill that guy, generally speaking. But that was also acknowledged afterwards. Obama gave a speech justifying it.
And Eric Holder wrote a whole analysis as the Attorney General, trying to give the order, the legal authority to the order. I have a weird, I don't know exactly how to describe this, but there's a Obama drone strike lawyer, a lawyer from the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department, who wrote that memo authorizing the use of drone strikes to target Americans. He was nominated for a seat and is now serving as a lifetime appointment to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. I alienated a bunch of my former supporters and allies in Washington because I came out against that nomination. This was an Obama Justice Department person who was, like John Yoo in the Bush administration, authoring legal opinions that basically legalized human rights abuses. And I got 60,000 people on a petition to block his nomination. And this was a nomination that many people on the left supported because it was Obama's guy. And that's kind of my concern with judicial nominations. It's poignant to reflect upon this given the announcement happening now. But people are very rightfully concerned about this court and the Supreme Court in particular. Our courts have been a shit show for a generation. I mean, the Supreme Court hasn't been legitimately composed since 2000. In the year 2000, when they decided Bush versus Gore, the court contrived its future composition.
Right.
That's sort of a constitutional circularity, you might say. I mean, the court's been illegitimately composed ever since. But that aside, when Democrats have had the opportunity to appoint justices and judges, they frankly have not met the needs of the moment at all. I spent 3 years in Washington when I worked at the American Constitution Society for Law and Policy. It was a network founded in the wake of the Bush versus Gore decision to try to restore balance to the law and fight the influence, particularly of the Federalist Society that was created in the 70s, pursuant to a very explicit strategy by the right wing, Justice Powell's infamous memo about basically baking industrial interests into jurisprudence. And so ACS was founded after the Bush versus Gore decision in 2001, actually, to counter this influence. I worked on the senior staff for 3 years. We built a pipeline of progressive jurists, potential nominees for the next Democratic president to appoint. And instead, President Obama, like President Clinton before him, they appointed prosecutors and corporate lawyers. They tried to make sure there were some diverse prosecutors and corporate lawyers in the bunch, and then they called it a day. And that tokenism, while actively ducking into the right-wing takeover of our courts, I mean, there hasn't been a liberal appointee, like an actual progressive appointee to the court, really since Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, Kagan, Sotomayor, Breyer, they're all frankly they're moderates relative to the actual spectrum of legal discourse. They're not leftists. They're like mainstream liberals.
Yeah, I mean, look, even Ginsburg, signed off on some rulings that weakened, probable cause, for searches. So that, I mean, you can make relative judgments, right? I would certainly rather have a mediocre, centrist judge, than somebody, who wants to take away abortion rights and collective bargaining rights. But if we're gonna keep our eye on the ball there, none of these people are really the kind of judges who would want, which is going to be incredibly important, because obviously right now we're in a we're in a period of defeat, right? As you say, right? There's the since the defeat of the Bernie Sanders campaign, for president, right? The prospects for building up a democratic socialist, alternative, to what we've got right now. We're in a much trickier situation than we were. But if that ever reverses itself in the future, right? If we have a we were in a situation where we had House and Senate majorities or president who really wanted to enact a Bernie-style social democratic agenda, get Medicare for all, get a Green New Deal, never mind any more radical socialist horizons than I might have than that, right? Then obviously the courts, almost regardless of the partisan composition, would be a massive obstacle to that agenda, right? I mean, I really don't see any way that the Supreme Court really, even if by some miracle, this current nomination doesn't go through, which I think it will, right? But I mean, but even if it didn't, right? I think that I have a very hard time seeing how the courts don't act to try to obstruct that agenda in every way they can, right? I believe in their creativity that they'll find ways to decide that all of these things are unconstitutional. So how can we counteract that, right? Like what is the end run or the strategy for dealing with that inevitable judicial obstruction look like?
Got you. I actually wrote a proposal around this 10 years ago. And just to your point, first of all, the courts have been long obstructionist with respect to allowing we the people to embrace a brighter future. People forget, we're one of the objects of progressive aspiration right now is the Green New Deal. It's an homage, among other things, to the New Deal, the first New Deal that President FDR put forward. And a lot of Americans don't realize that the Supreme Court, for the better part of a generation, stood in the way and struck down time and time again every effort through federal legislation to achieve any kind of redistribution of resources. And they elevated to a constitutional principle, which is to say, taking off the legislative table, they contrived this principle of property rights and tried to impose a laissez-faire economic policy through the courts, which is profoundly anti-democratic, of course, because these people aren't elected and they're not accountable in any way to the people. So to allow judges to be effectuating policy preferences is a very dangerous thing, and it's inherent in the exercise, but it was very overt at the time. And then one of the things that FDR did to compel the court to heal, as it were, and to respect democracy was threatening to expand justices, which would have weakened the influence of the sitting justices. It would have compromised the independence of the institution. And there was, people might have heard the switch in time, that save the nine. It's a phrase that many people don't know where it came from. And it was a switch by one of the justices in the West Coast Parish Hotel case, 1937 maybe, that put an end to this era, the Lochner era, and then unleashed an era of progressive social legislation that achieved things like the 5-day work week, Social Security, workplace protection so that people could get compensated if they get injured on the job. Like basic worker rights came about as a result of this fight. Now today, a lot of people learning from the FDR era, and I think learning the wrong lessons, have proposed to expand the court. I don't think it's a bad idea to threaten to expand the court should the Senate proceed with confirming a third Trump nominee. I don't think it's a good idea to actually expand the court. I think there's a better way to release our future jurisprudence from the stranglehold and shackle of the past. That is specifically to end judicial life tenure. Ro Khanna has recently come out in support of this proposal. I'm very excited for that. Andrew Yang has also endorsed it. I wrote an article proposing it in 2010. The first person I'd seen discuss it was Jack Balkin at Yale Law School, and it makes a lot of sense. We want judges and justices to be insulated from political pressure, but we don't want them to impose a generation-spanning limit on the ability of the political branches to respond to the consensus at a policy level of we the people of the United States. And so one of the things we need to do is to ensure that the incentive to nominate younger justices so that they will then go on to exercise enormous influence over their lifetimes. You can see that strategy particularly at play in the most recent nominees. It was true of Clarence Thomas when they nominated him in 91. It's particularly true of Justice Roberts, Justice Gorsuch. I can't even say justice and the word Kavanaugh together without grimacing, but each of them reflect this playbook, and 18-year staggered terms would diminish that incentive. It would ensure that justices have plenty of time on the bench to develop institutional expertise. It would ensure predictability in the process of vacancies and confirmations and nominations, instead of it just being like a random, everybody drop everything and run in all directions now for the next few weeks, which is what happens every time a vacancy happens. And they become these hyper-politicized footballs. None of that has to happen. It can be a very different process. And frankly, the idea of life tenure makes no damn sense anyway. This is a democracy. We have an anti-nobility clause in the Constitution, and we pretend that an entire branch should serve for life? I mean, it's preposterous. It flies in the face of every one of our norms. It would not take a constitutional amendment to effectuate that. We can do that through legislation. And the particular import, if we do stagger 18-year terms for Supreme Court justices, the very first thing that would happen is get Clarence Thomas off the bench. And that's something that I hope people concerned about the court's future responding to it with, I think, the ham-fisted, somewhat blunt instrument of adding justices. I hope they can appreciate the opportunity to guard the independence of the court by just cycling off some of the longer serving justices.
Yeah. I mean, that's really good. That makes sense. I mean, I think we've got to start thinking about, whether that's your proposal, whatever it is, right? I mean, like, I think any left strategy for implementing these important reforms that doesn't include some sort of some way to block the current power of these lifetime justices to override progressive legislation, is just not, is not a serious strategy, right? You have to say something about that.